moving on, I believe we are now to our Committee on Campus Planning, Buildings and Grounds. So sorry for the confusion to those in the public, but Trustee Eisen, you're up for the third time to please convene that committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Day. Will the Committee on Campus Planning, Buildings and Grounds please come to order? It's now time to consider today's consent agenda, which consists solely of the approval of minutes. Is there any objection to the approval of the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. The committee does have one item on today's discussion agenda. Item 2 is an action item requesting acceptance of interest in real property for California State University, Sacramento for an off-campus center in Placer County. The item will be presented by Steve Relier and Vi San Juan. Steve, do you wish to begin?
Thank you. At the November 2019 board meeting, the trustees were presented an information item outlining a proposed gift of real property and potential development of Sacramento State Off-Campus Center in Placer County. This action item seeks approval to delegate to the Chancellor the authority to negotiate and execute the terms of an agreement with Placer Ranch to accept the gift of real property, execute the terms of an MOU with Placer County related to the development of the 301 acres, and to name the site the CSU Sacramento Placer Center. The intent is to build the center with public-public and public-private partnerships, resulting in minimal investment of campus resources. The county will be building a crime lab. We hope to be able to use 2 of the floors for instructional space. In addition, Sierra Community College passed a bond measure allowing them to build a student transfer building, which we could use for instruction as well. And we are working with the city to build a library that could serve the campus and the community similar to the libraries at San Jose State and San Francisco State. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to President Robert Nelson. President Nelson.
Thank you, Executive Vice Chancellor Relier. CSU Sacramento is thrilled about the Placer Ranch property and the potential it holds for the surrounding community and for our campus. The establishment of an off-campus center at Placer Ranch is a strategic opportunity to achieve the university's mission in the region. It is also a meaningful response to the documented unmet need for higher education in an underserved region of California. Future workforce development is of critical importance to the region, and Sacramento State is the most viable public institution in the area that can meet the demand in a timely fashion. CSU Sacramento is working to ensure proposed programs offered at the center would augment and support existing academic programs. This would be done by delivering programs through modalities or disciplines that are not currently offered, which would negate adverse impact on the established higher education institutions in the region. We have worked in consultation with the deans and members of the colleges to offer instructional activities that work towards meeting the workforce development needs of the region, as outlined in this slide. The overarching focus was on interdisciplinary approaches to learning, as well as partnerships with Sierra College to promote a seamless transition to CSU Sacramento. Initial analysis indicates a first phase of development that can accommodate a student population of 500 to 2,500 FTE. The university recognizes that the operational cost to pursue this center and believes moving forward with the center now will enable the campus time to complete the academic planning effort and then begin the physical campus master planning effort in consultation with our potential partners. I'll turn the presentation over to Vi San Juan to provide additional information. Vi?
Thank you, President Nelson. I want to identify in this slide the outlined area is Placer Ranch, the specific plan area, where the shaded area plus the Placer Ranch is the Sunset Area Regional Plan. So the total is the 8,500 acres. And so some of the questions I had received from the board reflect that the mitigation measures and some of the comments from the letters reflect the entire acreage, the entire 85 acres that was studied in the environmental impact report. The site identified for the potential university is within the outline of yellow and specifically the highlighted blue area. That's the 301 acres. Next slide. Placer County completed the draft and final environmental impact reports in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. As the site is largely undeveloped, there are a number of potential significant and unavoidable impacts over the 8,500 acre sunset area plan. On December 10th, the County Board of Supervisors approved and adopted the land use entitlements for the sunset area plan and the Placer Ranch specific plan. Subsequently, a lawsuit was filed challenging the county's CEQA document, and that issue is pending. In recent weeks, the CSU and Board of Trustees have received comments on the proposed development. Comments have noted concerns with the loss of farmland and vernal pool wetlands, the lack of affordable housing, increased greenhouse gas emissions, worsening air quality, and poor access to rapid transit. I want to just address some of the items that came up in the letters. So there were letters sent to the trustees on Friday and a second set sent out yesterday. So you should have received 2 sets of letters of, I think, 49 letters total. With regard to affordable housing in the general plan, there is a 10% requirement. So for the Placer Ranch specific plan, the current, the environmental report identifies 5,636 units are proposed. So 10% would be 564 units. Similarly, the sunset area plan has a number of dwelling units, and 10% would be required from that area as well, based on the current documents. With regard to biological resources, in the mitigation plan, the Placer County Conservation Plan has not been adopted yet as of the time the environmental impact report was written. But really it centers in on a strategy. The conservation strategy is one of surveying the animals, the plants in the area, minimize the impact, establish for the animals a habitat reserve system, develop a long-term conservation for the habitat in the reserve system. So that has not been adopted yet, as I understand it, but that is the structure of their plan for Placer County. There are a number of areas where biologists would be required for any of the developers. They would have to be on the ground before any ground is disturbed, any soil is moved. Similar things that we adhere to now include avoid the breeding season. For birds, it would be avoid the nesting season. So that happens now with raptors on CSU campuses. And a number of areas, there are buffers included, depending on the animal and then what the animal eats. So for the elderberry beetle, there's a buffer around the elderberry plants, for example. So these are laid out in the mitigation and monitoring plan. With regard to odors, it is identified that there are some best management practices that have yet to be adopted from the landfill operators. Some are going to be implemented, so I think there's positive movement there. And the city of Roseville is modifying their process, so some of the waste that will be going to the landfill will be cleaner in essence. But based on the mitigation and monitoring plan, 90% of the existing odors would be mitigated. It would be reduced based on the existing baseline level if the mitigation measures are implemented, and that number changes to 50% based on the 2058 population. So as the population grows, there will be more product to be processed so that it will be not as effective, but currently, based on the current levels of effluent, it would be very effective at 90%. The most odorous item is the composting. So the best management practice would be to avoid mixing the compost, but to have an air inducement. So that is planned currently. That's one of the positive changes that the landfill operators are making. But other items include start testing the emissions, the odor emissions, and provide, for example, odor neutralizers. So there are things that the landfill operators can do, and it sounds like they're moving that direction to address concerns of the existing occupants and residents of the area. The developer specific mitigations that they have control over is they've included a 500-foot buffer for play field areas from the landfill, a 1,000-foot buffer for businesses, and a 2,000-foot buffer for residential. So that's the plan from the developer's point of view, the distance from the landfill. With regard to hazardous materials, the mitigation plan includes that there will be a future phase 1 environmental assessment, and that will identify if there are any hazardous materials on site. With our draft agreement with Placer Ranch, there is dollars in the agreement should there be hazardous materials. And the other item in the mitigation plan is if there are any, that there will be a buffer from pipelines, should there be pipelines found. So some of the hazardous materials investigation has not been done in depth, but there are some planned mitigation should there be hazardous materials found. With regard to traffic, in the mitigation plan, it identifies the improvements are not fully funded. The county is looking at a countywide capital improvement program and traffic fee that would help fund improvements to roadways, widening roads, signals, for example, and they're proposing a fair share of their development towards, say, freeway roadway improvements and operations. The county is to prepare a transit master plan, so some of the concerns on transit would be addressed when the county prepares the plan. Similar to CSU, there's also transportation demand management plans that would be prepared. So that just gives you a little bit of feel for what's in the mitigation monitoring plan, because there are a number of resources that are impacted. So the campus engaged in due diligence to ascertain the conditions of the property and did not find any significant concerns with the condition of the land or mitigation measures related to the development of the proposed off-campus site. Because of its discretionary authority over the approval and development of the proposed Sacramento State Placer Center, the California State University is a responsible agency under CEQA for a portion of the project. As such, the board is obligated at the time it approves the gift agreement to affirm that it has considered the Sunset Area Plan and Placer Ranch specific plans' environmental effects as described in the EIR prepared by the lead agency, the county, using its own independent judgment, and that it approves the land development plans as noted in the proposed resolution. So from this point, if the board were to agree, then the CSU would start its own planning process. As President Nelson commented, the campus would need to complete the academic master plan, and then the physical master plan follows the academic master plan. And we get with our partners, as he mentioned, potentially Sierra College and the county, and start looking at how the campus would potentially lay out the buildings on this 301 acres. There are vernal pools on the acreage of the 301 acres. There's also overhead lines. So there's some constraints that we would have to work with based on the 301 acre land and the biological resources. But that process for CSU has not begun. So Chair Eisen, that concludes our presentation. I hope I've addressed some of the comments from the concerned citizens, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that report. We will have discussion among the board members in a second. I do have one question, comment. I really appreciate you addressing these environmental issues because the board obviously we see the economic and the educational benefit of a project like this, but we are going to be concerned when we hear from, as we did today, that there are a number of environmental issues. So I am very glad that you went into some detail on that for us. I want to ask a question about that. It sounds like what you are saying is that this is an early stage approval that we're engaging in at this moment. There will be opportunities, many opportunities for the board as this develops to check in on the issues that were raised in with the public speakers, and we'll have an opportunity to be comforted that you are working cooperatively with these various entities and agencies to be sure that the environmental impacts are within our sustainability policy and the things that we have set forth as goals for ourselves. Is that a fair read of what you're saying, Bai?
It is. That's correct.
Very good. All right, committee members, any questions or comments? Jane, I see your hand up. You can begin, and then Andy.
We have Juan, we have Trustee Garcia, and Trustee Carney, and Trustee Krensk so far.
Okay, Jane, can you begin?
Sure, thank you. First of all, Bai, thank you very much for your report. Your comments answered many of the questions that arose in my mind as I reviewed the environmental impact report and the mitigation monitoring plan. And thank you, Becky, for your comments. So I have one remaining question, and it has to do with the hazardous materials report. As I understand the proposed agreement, a phase one environmental assessment will be done, and remediation up to $5 million will be covered by the developer. But I'm wondering what will happen if actually a phase two environmental assessment needs to be done. So there's actual testing.
I would say we would try to make that assessment at the end of phase one. If it turns out we need to do more and there is a cost, we'd likely be able to access the $5 million. If it were to cost more than $5 million, I mean, if we were to go that direction, then we would need to make a decision. Is that where we would construct, or is there another location on the acreage further away from what hazardous material were to be identified?
So the cost of the phase two would be covered by the developer.
I don't know if it would go upwards of $5 million. Certainly, if it were within the $5 million, I would believe they would agree. We could check with that, check within with that. But we would have a decision also whether we proceed. We could elect not to proceed.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Becky.
Trustee Garcia.
Thanks. So thank you for the presentation, and thank you especially for addressing some of the concerns raised during public comment. My question, I think, is more geared towards your general counsel and maybe Chancellor White, if you can provide some insight. But as I understand it, the environmental impact report is involved in litigation, I guess. How would an undesirable outcome with the litigation affect the project and the university? And I know, it's tricky to talk about ongoing litigation, so I understand if you can't answer it directly. I just want to make sure that we're not only, tracking and following any litigation, but we're aware of any impact it could have on the university.
Yeah, this is Andy Juan. You're correct. I want to hesitate on commenting on litigation in an open session. I will tell you that we are not a party to the current environmental litigation that was referenced by one of the public speakers. And we would be doing our own environmental impact report at the time we actually develop the property. So that would be a separate process. I don't know if Vi wants to add anything to that.
No, that's correct. We have a copy of the litigation, but We're monitoring it, but there's enough, it will take us significant time should the board accept the land to complete our own planning process. So it may be that the litigation works its way through the courts while we're completing our planning process, including, say, the phase 1 environmental that Trustee Carney mentioned.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that, and as I'm sure you are, I guess I would just suggest keep tracking it and to prepare in case it could have any adverse effects on the project and on Sacramento State.
So if I'm understanding you, Trustee Garcia, you're hoping, and I am sure this will happen, that if there is some negative impact from that litigation, which we're not a party to our project, that we will be kept informed about that.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Did you say, Andy, that we had other trustees?
Yes, so you have trustees Krinsk, Fagan, Taylor, and Adamson.
Trustee Krinsk.
Yes, Miss San Juan, I want to thank you for being here and making the presentation and allowing us to have some direct personal involvement and understanding of what this project entails. I think you'll agree that this is a project that has raised emotions on at least a number of sides. And I hear, and I think you would agree, that a lot of what has to be done in the way of evaluating the environmental impact of what is already recognized to inevitably be an environmental degradation, and limiting that is important. And I wanted to know whether there would be any objection on your part before I suggested at some future date that we get a evaluation from an environmental perspective from, if possible, the Air Resources Board, and get them involved in doing the type of analysis that would be both incisive and of a greater depth than local resources may be able to put to that task. Is that at all feasible from your perspective? Do you mind?
I can look into the role of the Area Resources Board. If I recall, there was a landfill master plan that was in process, which I'm sure they used experts with air quality. But I can look in to see what the role of the Air Quality Board is with regard to landfill operations.
Oh, so you wouldn't, so your answer is you don't mind if someone or the board itself takes the initiative to get additional information that may better inform you as to the possible consequences from an environmental perspective.
I think that would be fine.
Thank you.
Trustee Fagan.
The goals of this thing sound very admirable from an educational point of view and development. My one kind of question is, some of these mitigation efforts and developments sound a little open-ended. So have you got a general, not worst case, but realistic negative case if things got a little more expensive than you're expecting? How much would we or the campus be on the hook for eventually if things really started to get a little expensive and, you know, beyond the $5 million? And where would those funds come from?
From a capital perspective, I think there would be decision points. We would bring to the board first the master plan. Do you agree with the master plan? And then we bring the capital outlay program to the board annually. So if we needed funds to co-fund the Sierra Transfer Center, let's say we wanted to add some classroom and laboratory faculty office space, then it would come to you for approval whether you would agree to fund an amount of square footage at the center. In working with Stockton, currently they have, just to give you a number, they're looking at a $60-some million project. So if, I don't have any budget numbers from Sierra, but if they were putting up 30 million, I'm not sure what their numbers are, but would it be a $30 million project? These are just numbers out of the air, but from an initial building, that may be a reasonable start.
And if we had to come up with extra funds, where would those funds come from?
Well, currently they would come from the CSU fund, whether it's financed or pay-as-you-go. That's our current process, especially absent the GEO bond. But that's why we're looking at partners. But from our fund source, it's our operating fund.
But this is all early days and lots of stuff can change.
Great.
Thank you.
Trustee Taylor.
Chair Eisen, my question was answered. I think it's a good project. I would like to move its adoption at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Trustee Adamson.
I like Trustee Taylor. My big issue was the environmental site assessment language that's here. But I think you've answered my question. It appears that there is a plan for how we will mitigate going forward. So I'm fine with that. And I too support this project. I do have one question, I guess, while I'm here. I guess I'm a little concerned about us committing to naming a full CSU campus 25 years before that campus may ultimately become a campus. Is that a practice that we've done in the past?
I think the only time we named it straight a full campus was when San Marcos moved from a center to a campus. But I think we're proposing it to be Placer Center.
Right, except you say that and should it expand to a main campus, it will be named California State University Placer. That's right. At least what's in my material here. So we're committing to its name as part of the acceptance of this gift for a campus that maybe come to fruition 20 or 25 years from now, correct?
That's correct. You're right.
Was there a similar issue with Channel Islands in terms of the naming where we had to decide which way to go there?
Not that I recall. I don't recall that being it could have been in the legislation, but I'd have to take a look at that.
Okay.
Chair Eisen, Chancellor White would also like to speak.
Wonderful. And I think, have we heard now from everyone else?
Now Trustee Fagan has raised his hand as well again.
Okay. Chancellor White, why don't you go first? And then Doug, if you still have a question, we'll go to that.
Thank you, Trustee Eisen. With respect to Trustee Adamson's point, the convention of how campuses are named is CSU and then, Stanislaus or Fresno, et cetera. So this is just consistent with the overall naming strategy for the campuses. It doesn't mean 25 years from now, the board can't decide to name it the Larry Adamson campus because of your wonderful donation to pay for it.
Very good.
And then with respect to a comment, I wanted just to clarify the record with Trustee Krent's comment about that we would not object to having more information coming from like the Air Quality Board or something with respect to the Placer project. And Jeff, I think you used the words the board itself or you could get more information. We don't have a practice of the board going out and requesting information directly as an individual member or as the board, but the board certainly can direct and does direct CSU staff and leadership to do things that they want to have done. So I just wanted the record to be clear that everything kind of comes through the chancellor's operation for those kinds of requests. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Trustee Fagan.
Just Larry's question brought up one question in my mind. There's a number of cities around state, for example, Palm Desert, who are eagerly asking for a full-fledged campus. Maybe our economy is such that we're not going to be talking about that for a while. But does our action starting down the road on this project in any way bring that to the head of the line for a new campus, or in any way lessen the chances of Palm Desert or anywhere else getting a campus?
I think this is just one that has been in the works for a number of years. We first brought it to the board, I want to say in 2006. We are in the midst of a study looking at capacity assessment, and Palm Desert, as you mentioned, is one of those campuses included in the study. So currently it's an item that we're looking at, and the legislature has asked us to study.
Thank you, Vi. Thank you, committee members. This is an action item.
We have a hand from Larry Adamson.
Larry, unmute yourself first.
I'm sorry, I had one other question. Vi, you had commented that the developer is committed to a 10% low-income housing component or units into this project, which would equate to over 500 units. None of what we will be building on our campus, i.e. student housing, will help the developer to fulfill that requirement. Is that correct?
I believe our student housing is separate from that 10%.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? Andy, do you see any other hands?
No other raised hands.
Very good. All right, this is an action item before the Committee on Campus Planning, Buildings and Grounds. The action item is the acceptance of interest in real property for California State University, Sacramento for an off-campus center in Placer County. Only committee members may vote. May I have a motion?
Move it.
Second?
Second.
All right. Ms. Kiss, once again, could you take a roll call vote of the Committee on Campus Planning, Buildings and Grounds on this item?
Okay, thank you. And committee members, again, if you can please ensure that your audio is unmuted for the roll call vote. Trustee Adamson.
Yes.
Trustee Carney.
Yes.
Trustee Eisen.
Yes.
Trustee Fong.
Yes.
Trustee Kames.
Yes.
Trustee Krinsk. Trustee McGrory.
Yes.
Trustee Sebelius.
Yes.
Trustee Taylor.
Aye.
And Trustee Krinsk one more time.
You have to unmute.
You're muted, yes.
Gotcha, thank you. Chair Day.
Yes.
Chancellor White.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Kiss. The item is approved. Chair Day, this concludes the business of the Committee on Campus Planning, Buildings and Grounds.
Thank you, Chair Eisen.